from the Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Last week we mentioned this. One of the big guys, many failures in geopolitics, was allowing proxies for the mullahs in Iran to interrupt global shipping. Talking about the Houthis, a designated terrorist organization, again, Iran proxy, in Yemen, disrupting, extending the time of delivery of as much as 25% of global trade that includes items that are shipped. Well, Trump has taken notice of that, moved his attention to the Houthis, announcing Saturday that he was taking decisive and powerful action against them. Attacks on American vessels will not be tolerated. We will use overwhelming lethal force until we have achieved our objective. To all Houthi terrorists, your time is up, and your attacks must stop starting today. So another instance of FAFO. Pete Hegseth, SecDef, was on with Bartiromo talking about the larger issue of Iran and wherever Iran actually is in terms of its potential to possess a nuclear weapon. That needs to be derailed. Hegseth saying this.
Nobody wants a military option as it pertains to Iran. So he is, through maximum pressure, just as he did in his first administration, maximum pressure bankrupt the Iranians. Well, under Joe Biden, what happened? They took off that maximum pressure, and groups like the Houthis were awash in cash. Then they got arrogant, started shooting at our ships. We look weak. Not anymore. Not under President Trump. That will stop. The Houthis shooting at our ships will stop. Iran must get that clear message and negotiate the end of their pursuit for nuclear weapons because, as I mentioned, President Trump has said clearly they will not get a bomb.
Well, we're still not pen pals because the mullahs have not responded to the letter that Trump fired off. But for more on where we are at, Stephen Bucci served America for 3 decades as an Army Special Forces officer and top Pentagon official. Now a visiting fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Stephen, thanks for joining us.
It's always my pleasure to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
So the strikes against the Houthis, it's about time. I mean, I know he hasn't been in office that long, but it's certainly warranted, I would argue. And what does that mean? What sort of message does that send to Iran on the larger issue of nuclearization?
Well, I think it's another part of the signaling to Iran that, hey, pay attention. Trump is going to act differently than the Biden administration did, and you need to adjust your behavior accordingly. And you really should tell all your buddies, proxies, whatever you want to call them, that they need to behave differently as well, or a price will be paid.
Well, I mean, what is your threat assessment on Iran at present? Because the administration is suggesting that Iran has been weakened, which there's some evidence to support that. The getting out after the Houthis, after the hammering that Hezbollah has taken, Hamas has taken. But what is exactly, as I said, your threat assessment, and what should be done in advance of whatever understanding we have of where Iran's nuclear program is?
Well, they're greatly degraded from what they were before Israel started taking them to task. Both inside Iran itself, their air defenses are greatly degraded. But one of Iran's big threats before was, hey, you mess with us, we're going to turn loose our proxies, and you're going to pay an enormous price for it. Well, the proxies, the biggest ones are Hezbollah and Hamas, or were, and they are not destroyed yet. They're still there. They can still do things, but nothing like they could do before Israel started putting the wood to them. and they're not gone, but they're not as big a threat as they were before. Now, again, when you do this, it's, with the Houthis have taken a pretty good beating, both from the Israelis and from the United States, and they're still playing this game because they don't really care. They'll keep fighting, even if, down to the last, man, woman, or child that they can get to push some buttons. I think we need to focus more directly on Iran and get Iran to turn these characters off. Or we could just keep spanking them ourselves. That is an option, but it's going to, we're using up more of our munitions to do this. We need to. We should keep doing it, but we do need to pay attention, make sure we're not just bleeding off our own stocks at a time when maybe one of these bigger adversaries, China, Russia, might say, well, okay, looks like they're down a bit. Let's take our shot. All that needs to be balanced, and I think our executive branch right now is paying attention to it, realizes you can't just wag your finger at somebody and go no and think they're actually going to behave.
I don't know if Hegseth was asked this by Bartiromo. How close is Iran actually to a functioning nuclear weapon? Because we've been hearing they're weeks away for years. And Hegseth wouldn't go into any detail. He says it's classified, so forth. Understand that to a certain extent, but just in terms of giving the American people a clear a picture as possible here. Because when you continue to tell us that the threat is right around the corner, and it's been right around the corner for years and years and years on end, people get a little inured to that, and it starts to be credible.
Yeah, you're right. I do think they're closer than they've been in the past. But remember, when we say that, that doesn't mean they're suddenly in a week going to have the same kind of capabilities that Russia or China have. Right now, that even the open source stuff, the UN says, look, they've got enough material that in another couple of weeks they could then have that material at a point where it could be used to make, I think I read, 7 devices. Now, 7 devices doesn't mean a high-speed, multi warhead device that could go on top of one of their ballistic missiles and get to a target and actually hit it. That stuff, you're getting into different levels of engineering. Mostly we've been focusing on, can they produce something that when you set it off, it makes the big boom and the mushroom cloud? That doesn't mean they have the means to deliver it yet. Just having a missile and having a bomb doesn't mean it's going to work when they shoot it at the target. That's a whole nother layer of engineering that the Iranians have been trying to get Russians and the North Koreans to help them. The North Koreans are not to be trite, but they're not rocket scientists when it comes to their own ballistic missiles. They mostly use the ocean when they shoot them. So it's all of this. We're not at the edge of oblivion here or the apocalypse by any means. I couldn't put a weeks or months on it, Dan. I just that's not my specialty. But we need to realistically look at this. It's a threat. It's one we need to address, and we need to continue to address it, not sit back and say, we got a couple of months. That's a silly attitude.
But right. I mean, I agree with taking a hard line, of course. But by the same token, sort of what you were intimating, if Russia and China wanted to give the Iranians the technology, it could have already been done. They don't want to for an obvious reason, and maybe too much focus on Iran gets us off of what we need to do to minimize the threats posed by Russia and China, particularly together.
Yeah, we got to watch these guys. Even if these folks are not all colluding with their plans and synchronizing their plans, they're at least watching each other and looking for opportunities that they can exploit. we have to be, one step ahead on that multi-dimensional chessboard and say, okay, look, if this happens, here's the other potential consequences of us allowing that to occur. And I think we have the right team now to do that. Before, I did not have that level of confidence. The Secretary of Defense was weak. The Secretary of State seemed much more comfortable giving bad guys money than spanking them. And obviously the president was, not competent. So, we don't have any of those situations now. So I'm a little more comfortable as to what's going on.
Now, tomorrow, President Trump is scheduled to speak with Vladimir Putin to talk about the potential 30-day ceasefire to pave the way for, peace negotiations. Where does it stand right now between, Zelensky and Putin?
Well, it appears Zelensky's ready to make a deal. I think he realized he's not in a position to dictate to America how America's going to help him do that. But he seems to be a bit more malleable. Now, Putin gave some positive signals, and then he bounced off and said, well, but we're not really getting enough from this. So he's, I think, going to try and play a little hardball, see what he can get away with. That's his modus operandi all the time. And I think this call tomorrow is going to be very, very crucial. What comes out of that is going to set the tone as we go forward. If he tries to bully Trump, that's not going to work for him. Trump doesn't respond well to people not being cooperative with what he thinks is a good idea. And, Putin may try that. I'm hoping Putin will read the signals because he is a smart person. He's an evil guy, but he's smart. I'm hoping he will pick up the signals and say, let me get what I can, but not push this envelope too far because then I may lose a lot more than I want to.
Well, right. And the other thing that could frustrate Trump, too, is if Putin tried to buy time, because Trump obviously has a sense of urgency about this in a way that Putin doesn't, and that may upset Trump even more than if he tries to overreach to get to get more than Trump and Zelensky, for that matter, are otherwise willing to give. Is if he tries to four corner him on this process, because Trump wants to move. He wants to spend as little political capital on this as possible and get something done.
Exactly right. So it's going to fall into Putin's hands how he decides to play it. I really hope he doesn't misread Trump and try and get away with something, or whether it's to get terrain or stuff or to for more time. But I'm with you. Trump has already felt like he's used up a lot more time on this than he should have, and he's really, really ready to get all these characters in the room, come up with something, and move on to the next issue.
Speaking of America's enemies, this was interesting and rather enjoyable, actually. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, throwing the South African ambassador to the United States out of the country. Obviously with the agreement of the president, basically saying that he is a race-baiting politician who hates America. He hates Trump. We have nothing to discuss with him, so he is persona non grata. Get the first plane back to Joburg. How about that?
Yeah, that's the way the Secretary of State can play hardball. Any ambassador that gets sent to a country, you don't have to accept them. And if they do something you don't like, you can send them on their way. That's the normal way diplomacy is done. And sometimes ambassadors think they're a little more of a deal than they are. And, they're not just the representatives of their country, but they can spew their own personal opinions and attack the politicians of the host country. And this is not just an American thing. This is anywhere. We've had ambassadors thrown out of countries because they get too mouthy.
Yeah, and right.
That's a big step for a country because, everybody wants to be friends with America. But, this guy way pushed his limits. He seems to be a pretty reprehensible character. So good on Secretary Rubio. He said, "Yo, we don't have to put up with this nonsense. Send him home."
I wanted to get this is a bit below the fold, but perhaps you have a view on this. The Wall Street Journal thought it important enough to weigh in on the Office of Net Assessment within the Pentagon that is being shuttered reportedly by the Trump administration. And they argue that, even though this is an office within the Pentagon that very few people have ever heard of who don't work in defense and national security issues, that this 50-year-old agency actually was crucial in strategic thinking and war planning. They offer a lot of credit to its longtime director, Andrew Marshall, for perceiving how weak the Soviet Union was long before many understood it, spotting the threat that was percolating in China while the U.S. was still focused on fighting in the Middle East and so forth, that it was forward-thinking and it's a good strategic office within the Pentagon, and maybe there needs to be a personnel change or a reorientation, but its track record warrants maintaining the agency in some form. Do you have any view on this?
The Office of Net Assessments has been an enormous positive feature in the Pentagon since it was formed. It's like the internal think tank of the Pentagon, and they have thought way out in the future when, a lot of military folks, to be honest with you, and I'm one, have a pretty much I got to kill the target right in front of me. That's what I'm focused on. It's a trend and a sort of a methodology for a lot of us in the military, and we need somebody to stretch us sometimes to think beyond that, because otherwise you get caught short. You're surprised by things. The Office of Net Assessment has never been a negative in my mind. It's a very small office. It's not like it's sucking up massive amounts of resources, but they find the right people. They come up with plans and views that others maybe don't have. They're not, they don't dictate to anybody, but it allows the secretary and the chairman and even the services to have that longer view. I agree. I don't know who's in charge of it right now since Andy Marshall died, but if they need to change some personnel, that's fine. Because I don't know what has happened under Obama and under Biden, but closing it, I don't know. I think that they ought to take another look at that. If they need to adjust it, fine. But we need somebody thinking long term in the Pentagon, and sometimes not being a part of one of the major structures within it is a good idea.
Stephen Bucci served America for 3 decades as Army Special Forces officer, top Pentagon official, now a visiting fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Stephen, thank you.
It's always my pleasure, guys. We look forward to talking to you next week.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Have you seen our energy bill? You'd think Elon used our furnace to power his rocket ships.
Very funny, babe. That furnace is 20 years old and probably hasn't been cleaned in 10.
I'll have Air Right Heating and Cooling check it out. They've seen it all. Plus, there's still time to take advantage of federal rebates. They even give AM 560 listeners $56 off any service.
Visit Air Right Heating and Cooling today at air-rite.com. That's AIR-RITE.com. Air Right Heating and Cooling, doing it right since 1959.
So, how's the separation going? Are you guys able to work things out?
No. I think we're headed for divorce.
That sucks. Gonna be an expensive legal battle?
Well, no, that's one thing we agree on, actually. Arbitration.
Arbitration? Like mediation?
Sort of, but better. We'll have a firm decision.
Oh, that's easier. Who's your arbitrator?
Bert Hochberg.
That attorney at Schiller, DeCanto, and Fleck?
Yeah, senior partner. Comes highly recommended.
Are you facing divorce or a family law issue? Burton S. Hochberg offers